Next, we welcome a couple that could teach co-founders across the globe a thing or two about shouldering partnerships and bringing the best out of each other. Tom and Astrid are partners, entrepreneurs, behavioral designers, writers, and teachers who run SUE, which is committed to helping people become successful in their achieving their personal and work goals. Astrid is an advertising professional and a social scientist. Her creative mind explores opportunities and solutions in strategic planning, copywriting, and creative direction. From qualitative researcher to strategic planner, creative direction to TED speaker, Tom has done it all. Together, they take us through the inspiring story of transforming an ad agency through behavioral science, lessons from the rocky transformation of SUE. Tom and Astrid, thank you for being here today. All yours.
Thank you, Aditya. Yeah, well, first of all, as you can see, there's no Astrid, and I'm very sorry for this. She's sick, she's in bed, and she's actually the beauty and the brains of the company. So so you have to deal with me. But she's both my co-founder and my wife, so we kind of share the same story. So what I want to talk about is about the transformation of an ad agency that was struggling for its survival into a behavioral science consultancy, and how putting behavioral science at the core of what we do really really transformed our company. But before I start, I want to make two remarks. First of all, I'm going to talk a lot about failure, because I think that failure really is, and I would say dramatic failure really is the best way to learn something about change. And the second thing is I'm fully aware also about the survivor bias. So once you were able to successfully transform, you kind of always reverse engineer the story that it was inevitable, based on your brilliant strategy and your visionary thinking. Whereas, of course, in every surviving company, a lot of luck and probably some irrational factors also played really a big role. So I'm fully aware of this survivor bias. However, I do think that there are some interesting things we learned along the way that might be, I think, very helpful if you think about transforming your own company, or if you're struggling with the business model of your ad agency. So let me first take you back to about 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, Astrid and I were leading a quite a successful ad agency here in Amsterdam. And according to the market, we were doing great. We just were nominated as Agency of the Year in the Netherlands. We were working for clients like Nike. We were winning awards in Cannes. But the problem was we hated every bit of it. And I think that the real problem was that what we saw at that time was that the agency business model, the business model of what we were doing was working less and less. And at that time, I think we saw two major problems, two major shifts or transformations that were challenging the agency business model. So the first one was that clients were changing. And I think the reason why clients were changing was that at that time, around 2010, 2011, all their CEOs went on a pilgrimage to Silicon Valley. And once they came back from Silicon Valley, they all saw the light. And they were singing this mantra of we need to do digital transformation. And the consequence of all these companies trying to successfully transform themselves digital was that they became obsessed with measurement. Everyone became obsessed with the only thing that we do is the thing that we can measure. And so what we saw in advertising was, of course, that if you compare advertising with this whole obsession with metrics, then advertising kind of feels like this medieval craft in which you just have to throw some money at it and hope that it will work. Whereas in this new world, everything became measurable. And so budgets were massively shifting from offline to digital, and even in the digital budgets were shifting from, creative campaigning to automatic programming. So the amount of of money in this market for creative ad agencies was really, really shrinking. And so I think that what followed from that was a second transformation wave. As they came back from Silicon Valley, they also noticed that that what made these companies in Silicon Valley so successful was the fact that they had a radically different way of working. All these companies were able to grow so rapidly because they had this agile way of working. They had multidisciplinary teams. They were constantly A/B testing. They were collaborating around the customer problem in a very, very agile way. And so all our clients in our markets, they were doing the same thing, and they had big reorganizations, all the big companies, and they were now working in multidisciplinary teams, trying to solve the customer problem by combining competencies within a company. You could actually say that as of 2010, 2011, at least in the Dutch market, but I assume this was the same story in different markets as well, was that companies started to realize that creativity or creative problem solving, or even moving fast in an agile and creative way, was becoming a critical competence that they should have internally. Whereas they were used to outsourcing creativity, what we saw more and more was that they were defining it as a critical competence. So that was the first big problem. Clients were changing. And the second big problem was that markets were changing. What we also saw was that in our client base, everyone was in their market being attacked by digital companies. Every market became a digital market. I don't know if you still remember, there was this famous quote by Ray Inamoto. He was the creative director of AKQA back at the days. And we actually put up this quote in our agency, and it said, what was it again? Business models from the least expected players or angles are disrupting your business faster than advertising can save it. And that was so true. So what we saw was that more and more clients were betting their money on trying to cut cost and trying to play the games, play the rules of the game, the playbook of these digital companies. And as you probably know, these digital companies, they didn't need advertising. They simply did everything in-house because they had digital marketing capabilities, design capabilities, behavioral science capabilities. So everyone was talking at that time about the agency of the futures, because all advertising agencies were fully realizing that they were kind of drifting on this ice plate that was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and everyone was trying to figure out what this agency of the future could be. But the problem was that Astrid and I felt that at that time that all the interesting stuff was going on outside of our industry. Really, all the things that were fascinating us were happening outside the advertising industry. So to name a couple, there was first the conversion optimization community, which was fascinating. When we went to conversion optimization conferences, we really felt that this was the avant-garde of the digital marketing industry. They were obsessed with A/B testing, with psychology, with figuring out how to tinker with technology and design and psychology to make things work and to figure out how to grow things. So we thought that was fascinating. Then there was the persuasion design community. It's not a public secret that it's actually the persuasion design community and the UX community that kind of reintroduced behavioral psychology into the marketing community. It was the Silicon Valley UX community that really they were actually the first one who brought back the Cialdini book on influence. It was practically neglected for 20 years in the marketing community, until the UX community and the persuasion design community took back these principles to figure out how to get people hooked and addicted to digital interfaces. So we thought, wow, that's interesting what the UX community is doing. And then there was the lean startup community, and they were all obsessed with, combining these two into figuring out how to design, develop, and prototype successful marketing strategy. And I think the most frustrating part was that all thinking around creativity was also not taking place in the ad industry. I don't know if you remember, around 2011, 2012, there was this book by this Ed Catmull. He was the CEO of Pixar. The book was called Creativity.Inc. And that was mind-blowing. All the great thinking about how to create a culture of creative excellence within a company was not being written by the creative industry, but by by a film company, by Pixar. And so we were deeply frustrated at the time with our inability to transform the agency from within. And what we saw, even if we tried, was that our creatives, they were obsessed with, I think they mistook originality for creativity. That's really the big problem in the ad industry, is that creatives are obsessed with originality. And I can imagine why this is the case, because they are definitely also fully aware of the fact that most of their work is absolutely pointless. So they try to derive meaning from their work by trying to win awards with their original ideas. They couldn't care less about solving the client problem, but they wanted to make original stuff. And to me, creativity, or to Astrid and I, creativity has always been about trying to figure out new and exciting ways, and trying to combine sciences and frameworks in order to solve the customer problem for the client. So what we decided was, we just quit the agency. We were managing directors of an agency in Amsterdam. We just quit our agency and decided to start something else, to start our new company. And we founded Sue back in January 2012. By the way, the company Sue, or the name Sue, is named after this magnificent song by Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue, which I think is one of the most beautiful songs ever written. And it's a song about an intervention. And we, at that time, we figured, the intervention, the idea of an intervention is probably it's like creativity on steroids, whereas advertising is trying to basically seduce you by, hey, this is attractive, buy it. And intervention is a much more sophisticated way of thinking about creativity. You design an intervention, and you do that with the idea that maybe 3 steps deeper in the funnel, people act upon that intervention, or a desired outcome follows. So and this is, if you don't know the song, look it up. It's a beautiful song about an intervention. So when we founded Sue, we founded it on a couple of first principles, if you will, key principles. And so the first one is that the core of what we do should be about behavior, not about communication. I don't know if you ever heard about Charlie Munger. He's the associate of Warren Buffett. Both of them are probably one of the richest person and most successful investors in the world. And Munger, he's 93 years old right now, but he's famous for this beautiful aphorism. According to Munger, he says, well, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so if you work in branding, every problem looks like a branding problem. If you work in advertising, every problem looks like advertising should be the solution. And so if you put behavior first at what you do as a company, you become agnostic to what kind of tool you want to use. But because what you really want to achieve is behavioral change. And what your tool set is you don't mind using all kinds of tools. If you can use a combination of branding, of design, of technology, of web, of digital products, of technology. We even recently did a project for the Dutch government in which we used children as a tool in order to persuade their parents to stop using their smartphone while driving. So even kids could be a medium or a technology for behavioral change. So that's really the first thing. If you put behavioral change at the heart of what you do, and you try to reverse engineer from there, thinking, what are the tools, mental models, technologies, frameworks I can use in order to create behavioral change, that really is transformative. That really forces you to rethink the whole way you structure your company. Then the second, I would say, the second, just a second, I have a bit of my nose is running. The second market convention that we tried to challenge was the idea of creativity. So we thought creativity really is a step-by-step process. Creativity is a function of a well-designed process. And the convention that we tried to challenge with that was this whole idea that the advertising industry is obsessed with, is that creativity follows from genius creative teams, and that you have to structure a whole company to nurture the genius creatives who will come up with a magical idea if you give them enough time and enough beautiful context in which this aha idea, aha moment will eventually appear. And we thought that was utter bullshit. I mean, a great creative idea really is a function of a well-designed creative process. And if you think about it, the traditional way of turning human understanding into ideas is that you first hire a research company to do the research, and then they produce a big report. And then you hire a strategic company to design your strategy, to develop your strategy, and then they create a big report. And then you hire a creative agency to turn that strategy into a big idea. And then usually you also have to hire a production company to turn that big idea into something tangible that eventually reaches, becomes the interface between your whole insight and strategy and the end user or the consumer. And so there's a lot of waste being produced in that process, because the strategic people only read the management summary or the executive summary of the research report. And then the creatives usually only look for the strategic insights that kind of matches with their idea of what they want to create. So they use strategy to post-rationalize the creative idea that they wanted to produce. And so before you know it, you have designed this very elaborate, very costly process from research to strategy to idea to production that produces an incredible amount of waste between the initial insights and eventually the thing that becomes the interface between the brand or the company and the end user. And so we thought that this is such a crappy creative process. If you want to think of creativity as creative problem solving, what you should do is that the team who designs the interventions should also be the team that does the behavioral analysis or the research, because they should feel the problem, they should spot the opportunities, they should fall in love with the problem, so that their work is all about designing solutions to solve human problems. And if you don't feel the target audience, if you have to design an intervention for diabetic people, but you have no idea on how diabetic people think, feel, and behave, what their deeper motivations are, of what their struggles are, you will never be able to produce a really good outcome. And so this was the second convention. We need to find a way to design a creative step-by-step process that produces far less waste than the traditional process. And then the third one is this idea of prototyping that we fell in love with looking at the real startup. And to us, the idea of prototyping everything is challenging the convention of the idea that you need to be an expert and that you are hired to produce a certain knowledge, and that you need to, that your clients want you to produce an insight or a knowledge based on your expertise. And that's of course also bullshit. That's bonkers, because if you need to design something for humans, you always miss the point to a certain extent. And once you embrace rapid prototyping and you embrace your own uncertainty, and you produce several variations and you put them out there and try to learn as fast as you can what hypothesis you had actually works in triggering the desired outcome or desired behavior, that's a much more fun way of being an expert or bringing your expertise to the table, because you quickly learn that every assumption that you have might potentially be wrong, and that sometimes an idiot idea that you didn't really believe in is actually the one that works in triggering the desired behavior. And so this whole idea of prototyping fast to learn as fast as you can what works and what doesn't work, and actually changing people's behavior, really is one of the most liberating things in our work. We treat everything as a prototype, and so we can't fail anymore, because the only moment we fail is that we learn something that it didn't work. So that's great, we learned this, let's try something else. So this idea in theory, so I hope you're with me that this sounds potentially really good. But the problem was, once we tried to implement it, we failed miserably. And in the first stage, there's a happy end to this story. But what we learned was that we failed miserably because of a couple of reasons. The first one is that we still called ourselves an agency. And that was problematic, because our clients, as long as you call yourself an agency, but you bring in all this thinking around behavioral sciences and around psychology, people still think of you as an agency, but then within the category of the agency, this interesting agency that's doing things with psychology. And so the problem is that we kept getting advertising clients, and these advertising clients wanted us to produce advertising, as long as we kept calling ourselves an agency. And we kept saying, no, we don't do advertising, but our clients really didn't understand what we did produce. So that became problematic. Then we also hired too many people to do the work, and not enough people to actually invest in the growth of the company. I would say classic failure of every company who's not in a scale-up phase. We also couldn't really figure out how to design a process in such a way that become economic profitable. We thought we needed 5 people to run a behavioral design sprint or a design sprint. So that became quite costly for us and for our customers to pay for it. So that didn't work. We couldn't sell the product because our process was just too heavy to solve our customers' problem. And I think the last one is definitely a classic agency mistake. We suffered from the classic Kruger-Dunning effect, which meant that the less you know about something, the more you are convinced that that thing really is easy and that you can solve that. So, for instance, we thought that we could easily master marketing automation. Because it sounds simple, and companies like HubSpot convince you that marketing automation is really, really simple. But we struggled incredibly hard to find a sweet spot between marketing intelligence and technology, and getting creatives to embrace these platforms to produce smart and creative outcomes. So we thought we had the answer to the agency of the future challenge mantra. We thought we nailed it, and our pitch was to clients, well, we're an ad agency that combines behavioral psychology, creative methodology, marketing automation, and technology into the process, so you will have more grip on your outcome. But the problem was we were thinking too much inside out. We were still trying to solve for the advertising problem. And the problem was, of course, the ad industry as such. Too many companies trying to fight for a smaller and smaller slice of the problem of the cake. And so in 2017 we really had a crisis. Astrid and I still can remember it vividly. It was Easter Day 2017. It was snowing, it was raining. We were sitting in a supermarket having breakfast. We were tired because we had a 6-month-old who didn't sleep for 6 months. And we were exhausted. And at Easter Day, we got a phone call from our accountant. And you know you're in trouble when your accountant calls you on Easter Day. So he said, well, I've been looking at the numbers. Are you aware of the fact that you're losing 100,000 euros per month and that you'll be bankrupt in 3 months? And we said, yeah, we kind of knew this in the back of our head, but didn't want to act upon that. So we had two options, whether to stop and to just quit and to accept the fact that that maybe we weren't entrepreneurs at all, or just grab our bags and try to save the company and turn it into something else. And I think and that's we try to do the second thing, try to transform it. And the beautiful thing of, if you're on a burning platform, you have no other options left than to make bold choices. And that's the beauty of it. You simply have to throw all your cards on the table and try to make it work, or otherwise you will die anyway. So we did a couple of interventions. The first one was we got rid of most of the staff, which costed us a lot of money. That actually burned the platform even a bit stronger. But it was the only solution, because if you want to transform a company with your current staff, there's so much resistance to change that you simply can't do it fast enough. So I think we fired about 15, 16 people and kept 4 of them to restart. Second one is we reframed the company from a agency into a consultancy. And we were kind of betting on the insight that the market, as I said in my introduction, that the market wasn't waiting for yet another company to outsource their creativity, but was waiting for companies who could help them to develop their customer intelligence internally. And so we said to clients, don't hire us for our campaigns, hire us to help you to improve your products, your service, your customer journey, your marketing through behavioral science. And that really was a key in kicking it off again. The third intervention was, we also decided to try to own the word behavioral design. And that was a tricky one, because we had fierce discussions on, yeah, but nobody knows this term in the market. Maybe some geeks, maybe some people in the UX community, but not in the market. And our clients have no idea what behavioral design is. So if we would call ourselves a behavioral design consultancy, people would go, what the hell is a behavioral design consultancy? And yet, on the other hand, we figured, but what if we figured it might work if we just build that category, if we just own that word and try to trigger the market's curiosity by constantly building all kinds of frames and stories around behavioral design and designing for behavioral change. And that really was a winning strategy, because owning the term behavioral design and writing, creating content based on behavioral design thinking was something that people in all kinds of industries got fascinated about. Because everyone, whether you work in marketing or HR, or whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a leader, you are fascinated about the idea of that there are principles for behavioral change that you can master. You can become better at what you do if you understand behavior, if you understand human decision making, if you understand human psychology. And so this really was a winning strategy for us to try to build the category, or build the word behavioral design, at least in the European market. Fourth intervention was if we wanted to first become more anti-fragile, at that time we read, of course, Nassim Taleb's book on becoming less fragile or becoming more anti-fragile. We figured we should diversify what we do. And so we introduced the Behavioral Design Academy. And it was, again, the idea of the Behavioral Design Academy was built on the same premise that if we believe that the market is transforming into developing more customer intelligence capabilities internally, then maybe it might be a good idea to teach them the behavioral science capabilities so that they can improve their own professional skills through behavioral science. And the Behavioral Design Academy quickly became really something that exceeded our expectations. We now have people, well, not at this point, we have to do them virtually for the most part, but people flew in from more than 42 countries now to Amsterdam to attend a 2-day masterclass, and the Behavioral Design Academy, in which we teach the behavioral design methods, really became an engine also for the other products, for the sprints, etc. So this brings me to the fifth intervention, which is we productize everything. We were so fed up with having discussions on budgets. And of course, the reason why we had discussions on budget as an advertising agency was because clients weren't convinced of the value of what we were creating. So if you transform your offering into a more value-based pricing, and so, for instance, we sell behavioral design sprints, and we said, look, this is the sprint. This is how it works. It takes it's a 13-day process. You get 2 people from suit. They follow this step-by-step process. This is the outcome. This is the amount of money that it costs, and no negotiation. This is the price. And people all go, okay, we understand. That's what it costs. And so I never have discussions on budget anymore. And I think the final intervention is this whole idea of what is behavioral design and what is the most, what is the best frame to use in your communication? Should we talk about behavioral science? Should we talk about irrationality? Should we talk about behavioral science, behavioral design? And we thought it was the best idea to talk about behavioral design and to talk about the behavioral design method, because there's a lot of talking, a lot of publication, there's an explosion of knowledge around behavioral science, but what you really want is to try to figure out how to turn behavioral science into a tool for creativity, a tool to come up with interventions and ideas for behavioral change. And so we were always talking about how to turn this. This, by the way, is a quote from one of our personal heroes who talked about this conference, Rory Sutherland. He said the job of a consultancy is to turn a deep human understanding into business advantage for their clients. And what a consultancy should do is to talk about the how. How are we going to turn that understanding into business advantage? So briefly, a couple of points before I'm very curious to hear about or to hear questions or thoughts or comments or critiques. So how did this end? Well, first of all, the Behavioral Design Academy is about 40% of our revenue, and again, we're not only had people from more than 42 markets already attending the academy, we're also doing more and more in company training with this behavioral design methods. We also spiraled out of advertising, and we're now working on all kinds of fascinating behavioral challenges. So the beautiful thing is, if you put behavioral change at the heart of what you do, well, basically everything is about behavioral change. So we have been working for political parties to help them to win elections through framing. We have been working for governments to work on radicalization problems, recycling, road safety. We've been working for banks to figure out how to help people to save more. We've been working for NGOs on fundraising and designing new fundraising propositions. We've been working on employee behavior, on trying to use these principles to, create a culture of excellence within companies, or to help companies to employees to be more productive, creative, and happy while working in distributed teams. So the kind of challenges we have been working on in the last couple of years really exceeded our expectations. And it's very important to throw in the mission of what we do, because if you work on behavioral change, if you work on influencing minds and shape behavior, well, there's of course this ethical question on aren't you going to use this, what we call dark wisdom of behavioral science, to manipulate people, and to hijack their brains, and to hijack their deeper emotions in order to, to get them to do what you want. And as you, of course, see everywhere in politics, this is exactly what's happening. Both technology companies like Facebook, or extreme right-wing populists like Donald Trump, are abusing behavioral science to manipulate people into certain behavior. We were very conscious from that from day one, and we crafted this mission statement that says, the mission of SUE is to unlock the potential of behavioral science to nudge people into positive choices about work, life, and play. And so this whole idea of using behavioral science to nudge people into positive choices is our review criterion for everything. So the question we always ask ourselves is, okay, dear customer, even if you're a bank and trying to sell more products, is the briefing that you want us to work on helping people to make smarter choices? Are you trying to sell them dodgy financial products, or are you trying to help them to save more or to build up more wealth for retirement? If this is the case, then no problem that you also want to make money from it, but we take human positive choices as a point of departure for the behavior, for every behavioral design and science project. And that's really the important difference between manipulation and behavioral design. And maybe one more thing to end up with and to open up for questions. I think that what it also did was, when you work in an advertising agencies, clients like you, but they don't respect you. Because in the end, in their world, you're an ad agency. You're the creative kids. And so they don't trust you with their critical business problems. But once you become a behavioral science driven consultancy, once you become an innovation consultancy that uses behavioral science as its key competence, they respect you. Because you can tell them through the sprints you did and the insights you got from prototyping and testing, you can perfectly tell them why a certain strategy will work and why certain strategies won't. If you use behavioral science, and if you don't, if you're not in the business of pitching your brand strategy to people who think branding is a bit of a dodgy science, but on the contrary, if you take them through what you've learned, and you can say to them, this strategy will work because of these psychological reasons, no one will argue with you anymore. And so what you basically do, you're in the business of helping your customers to make better decisions, to make smarter decisions. And once you're in the business of making them smarter and helping them to make smarter decisions, you get a lot more respect from them. They love you more, they like you more, they are much more willing to to pay for your services. So I think that's the end of the story. I'm really curious to hear your questions and thoughts or remarks. And I'm quickly trying to, I hope that I have a handkerchief.
Yes, you do. First of all, I want to say that was a great talk. I think this is a conversation. First of all, that is a pretty severe critique on agencies, but that is a point of view. Let's talk about it. I really wish Astrid was here. I hope she gets better soon.
Yes.
I hope you get better soon too. It's been a very interesting conversation, and there's something that I'd like to ask you, because you've seen both sides of it. You've come from advertising, and now you work with behavior design.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we've seen. Listening to you was amazing, because it almost seems like a mirror journey for us as well. Where I come from, and where I work with 1001 and Prakash, and we've had a very similar journey, and the kind of issues that we faced in the beginning when we began in the beginning was they were pretty much similar. One thing that I want to ask you, because you also come from a research background, and then and advertising, and now behavior. What I want to ask you is, in advertising, when you look at what you look at is the consumer, and you look at behavior, what what you see is the human. Is there a difference in the way that you've begun to look at these two entities?
I mean, a difference when you compare it with traditional research?
In terms of whom you're speaking to and the behavior, you're looking at consumer behavior change, you're looking at human behavior change. And is there a difference in the two? Is there a difference in the way the disciplines split this one human?
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is, well, there's a couple of remarks. First and foremost, I think the research industry is producing research and is producing way too much research because that's their business model. And so you end up with very elaborate papers that kind of gives you all kinds of percentages, so many people and this persona. And the thing is, once you read the research report, you are completely clueless on what you want to do with it or what you need to do with it. And so when we integrated behavioral analysis or the empathy round, that of course is a crucial part in design thinking as methodology. The empathy part is all about trying to get the people who design the interventions, try to get them to experience the customer or experience the audience they are designing for as profoundly as possible. And so when our favorite method is qualitative interviews, and we have this model called the influence framework. So, and this influence framework tries to bring all the forces to the surface that have impact on these people's behavior. We try to we try to fall in love with the problem, and we try to bring to the surface all the rational, irrational forces, all the irrational beliefs and thoughts, all the external forces that have an impact on the thinking, the beliefs, and the behavior of this person. And so if your design team, if your behavioral design team already can map out all these forces, then your behavioral analysis becomes a very powerful tool for ideation. So that's the big difference for me. It becomes a tool for ideation, and it doesn't become this elaborate process that eventually produces so many insights that you drawn in insight.
This is something that I also would like to ask you. The fact that when brands approach an agency, when they approach an advertising agency, they generally always know exactly what the problem is, and they're sure that the solution is advertising, right?
Yeah.
How have you worked around that? Because generally what you see when you work with behavior change or behavior design is that you have to look at the problem again and you have to leave the solution alone. So how?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. When you are an ad agency, your customer already figure out that advertising is the answer, or he or she simply is the owner of a budget that needs to be thrown into advertising. If you are a consultancy around behavioral change, your client has figured out that the problem is a behavioral one. And so the international clients that find their way to sue usually stumble upon our website because they already figured out themselves that their problem is a behavioral one, and they want to find some partner that could help them with overcome this behavioral question. And so this results in the fact that you get invited to much higher upstream in the value chain. They invite you to help them to solve their problem.
Okay. You've spoken about advertising. You have dissected it and you torn it apart. But what I do want to ask you is that advertising is so that is another. It's communication, and communication is another form of intervention.
Yes.
And so it is a tool.
Yeah.
I'm playing the devil's advocate here, and
Yeah.
so if it is that form of intervention, and so there are these firms that specialize in that particular intervention. Is it that do you think that possibly what is that ideal firm then that has to deal with communication? If you feel that the way that the agency functions currently is not efficient, what
Yeah.
should the process to create that intervention be like?
Yeah. Yeah, well, communication. If you approach communication from a psychological perspective, then communication serves all kinds of functions. Language serves all kinds of functions. So, if you want to persuade an audience that has, for instance, a high resistance towards an intervention, well, your first function of communication is to help them to at least they need to feel that you understand their pain. Then the second function is that you need to figure out ways to get them to trust you. Then the third intervention is you have to persuade them to at least take a little step. Because if you ask them a big question, then they will shy away again. And so you need to understand psychology in order to understand what you're designing for. For instance, there's this interesting little model described somewhere in the book Persuasion by Cialdini that is called the 9th model. And so he said, if you take the Cialdini principles, social proof, authority, scarcity, commitment, consistency, etc., said, if you design communication, if you design a flow, there's this particular order of principles that you should commit to in a certain way. And so he said there's basically 3 steps in every great persuasive chain. First one is cultivate relationship, then reduce uncertainty, and then motivate action. And so, for instance, I get about 100 vendor emails per week. And most vendors, when they approach me, they just it's like basically when you go on a first date and you immediately throw in, hey, want to have sex? And so that's precisely what most vendors do. They just say, hey, we are this great company. Do you need this product? We are so good in this, and this, and this. And you immediately go delete because you're one of 100. But I recently got a great vendor email a couple of weeks ago, and it was someone, she worked for a hotel, basically a castle turned into a conference center. And so she said, hi, my name is Wendy. I recently started this a company as a marketeer. I watched on your website, you guys do amazing trainings. And I also see that you have international guests attending your training. That's great. I can imagine that you want to create at least a bit of a great experience for the people who come to your training internationally. Well, we have this amazing castle. Would you be interested in coming and pay a visit to check if we can mean something for you? That was brilliant. I immediately sent her a love letter back. I said, this was such a good email. So what she perfectly understood was that she used the first function to cultivate relationship or to talk about my job to be done. And that is my job to be done to create an amazing training experience for people. And then she threw in her value proposition as an answer to my problem or to my job to be done. And so she perfectly understood that communication has so many functions in order to work, in order to penetrate the psychological brain.
She literally sent you the brief. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so interesting because yesterday we were in conversation with Professor Dilip Soman, and he said something.
Yes.
He said that when he meets when he's called for consulting and he meets clients and they say, for instance, should we go with the red one or should we go with the blue one, or should we do this communication or should we do that communication? He says because it comes from the way of science. He says, let's test it. I don't know. Let's test it. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I also throw this in meetings. Whenever the hippo, the highest paid person in the organization, is trying to install his authority into the meeting and saying, we should do this, I always go, that's really an interesting hypothesis. Let's prototype and test this to figure out if it works. And they all go, yeah, well, why not?
It's very interesting because advertising, the testing that happens in advertising happens in that small sample group, and then you say, okay, let's test these communication, let's see what they went with best, and then let's throw that out to everyone else. Do you think there is a possibility? Please do not answer with let's test it, but do you think there's a possibility that you create a different communication, and you literally put it out there. Not just over one sample group, but you put it out there and you said, let's see how the brand does
Yeah.
now. Test
Yeah.
let's have 3 campaigns and let's test it out there. Do you think that's an approach that would actually work, or would that dilute the brand? Would it confuse
This this is such an illusion created by people who are obsessed with their own brand. We can't confuse the consumer. The consumer couldn't care less. And the prototyping, of course, and when you use when you do prototyping, you only use limited segments or limited markets to figure out if your A, B, or C variation performs better. You have to do a control test, so it's only going to be a tiny fraction of the population. But we saw this many times that the creative direction that was the one that we didn't trust in, or what that was the most provocative one, and that management wasn't convinced of, turned out to be the most successful one. And if you have a great client who is committed to science and committed to measuring and improving, they went, okay, we weren't convinced, but the numbers are clear. Let's go with this one.
Interesting. I'm going to put some question. I'm going to put a question out there that we've received. So,
in today's time.
Okay, so here's a question. In today's time, people have a short span of attention, and that often affects ad agencies to create an impact on the audience through ads because of, yes, the short time. Do you think behavioral change can be brought in people through short ads?
Well, I think you should. I don't know if this is thanks for the question, but I'm not sure if short ads is the answer to your question. I think you're absolutely right. We are bombarded with cues and triggers that are all fighting for our attention. So a big part of the creative heavy lifting in your work should be figuring out how to break into people's attention. But once you have broken into their attention, then you need to work on a second level. How can I, how can I change their behavior? How can I work with my deeper understanding of their, unconsciousness to get them one step deeper in the funnel? And this requires, for instance, longer copy. If you, for instance, watch on our website, we have very long landing pages, because we know that once people are, their curiosity is triggered, they have already found their way, then they want more and more information to, to persuade themselves that this is what they want. So yeah, short copy is definitely an ingredient in your technique to try to figure out how to break into their attention. But it's just, I would say, the first base of communication. Being noticed is already some very heavy lifting, and behavioral science can play a great role in figuring out how to break into people's attention. But that's just a tiny part of the puzzle. I think influence is a chain of steps that you need to, you need to follow in order to eventually get them to a desired outcome.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Tom, I think there are a bunch of people with lots of questions. I'm going to direct them to your LinkedIn. I'm going to ask them to bombard you questions and crowd your weekend. Thank you so much. This was a lovely session. You've added so much to the Now Fest, and thank you so much for being a part of it.
The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks everyone for listening.